Pregnant wife stumbles upon rich husband and mistress in bed. Then he hears her lawyer. The elevator's mechanical hum had always been a comfort to Lauren Mitchell. 32 floors of ascending anticipation before reaching home. But today, at 7 months pregnant, even that familiar sound felt different. Her hand rested protectively over her rounded belly as she shifted the ultrasound envelope from one sweaty palm to the other. The baby had been active during the appointment, and Dr. Martinez had smiled when she'd pointed to the screen. Strong heartbeat. Everything looks perfect. Lauren glanced at her watch. 2:47 p.m. She'd finished earlier than expected at the Manhattan clinic, and Bruce wouldn't be home from his investment firm for hours. Perfect time to frame the new ultrasound photos and maybe start on the thank you cards from last week's baby shower. The hospital bracelet still clung to her wrist, its plastic edges slightly frayed. She'd meant to remove it in the car, but the excitement of sharing the good news with Bruce had made her forget. Their first child. After 3 years of trying, of failed attempts and quiet disappointments, this pregnancy felt like a miracle wrapped in morning sickness and swollen ankles. The elevator climbed higher, passing floors filled with other people's lives, other people's secrets. Lauren pressed her free hand against the cool metal wall, feeling the baby respond with a gentle kick. She whispered softly, "Almost home, little one." The 32nd floor arrived with its usual soft chime. Lauren fumbled with her keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the heavy oak door of their Manhattan penthouse. The space that had always felt like a sanctuary, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, cream-colored furniture that Bruce had insisted on, and the carefully curated art collection that made visitors pause in appreciation. But something was wrong. Music drifted from their bedroom. Not just any music, their wedding playlist. At Last by Etta James, the song they danced to at their reception 3 years ago. Lauren's smile faltered. Bruce never listened to music during the day, and certainly not their wedding songs. She set her purse down carefully on the marble entryway table, her movements suddenly deliberate and quiet. The hospital bracelet caught on her silk blouse, and she absently worked it free, the plastic clicking softly. Her heels made no sound on the Persian rug as she moved down the hallway. The bedroom door was ajar. Through the gap, Lauren could see movement, hear soft laughter that definitely wasn't coming from her husband alone. Her heart began to race, but not from the baby's weight or the climb up 32 floors. This was different. This was the kind of racing that happened when your body knew something your mind wasn't ready to accept. She pushed the door open wider. The scene unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Bruce, her Bruce, with his salt and pepper hair tousled the way it only got during their most intimate moments, was in their bed. Their bed, with its Egyptian cotton sheets and the headboard they'd picked out together during their honeymoon in Italy. But he wasn't alone. Chloe Summers, his 27-year-old assistant, was curled against him, wearing Lauren's silk robe, the ivory one from their anniversary trip to Paris, still carrying the faint scent of Lauren's perfume. Chloe's auburn hair spilled across the pillow where Lauren rested her head every night, where she'd dreamed of bringing their baby home to this room, to this life they'd built together. On the nightstand where Lauren kept her pregnancy books and prenatal vitamins, 2 champagne flutes caught the afternoon light. An empty bottle of Dom Perignon, the same brand they'd saved for special occasions, lay sideways between the glasses. But the cruelest detail was in the corner of the room. The crib they'd assembled together just last month, painted in soft sage green with a mobile of white clouds hanging above it, now served as a makeshift table. Chloe's discarded clothes were draped over its rails, and her heels sat where their child's first stuffed animal should have been. "Well, well," Bruce said, not even bothering to sit up when he noticed Lauren frozen in the doorway. His voice carried that tone she'd heard him use with difficult clients. Cold, calculated, dismissive. Look who decided to come home early. Lauren's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The ultrasound envelope crumpled in her grip as her hands began to shake. She tried to speak, tried to ask why, tried to understand how the man who'd held her hand during morning sickness appointments and cried when they heard their baby's heartbeat for the first time could be here, like this, in their bed. "Cat got your tongue?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt like poison. She stretched languidly, making sure Lauren could see every inch of the silk robe that had once made Lauren feel beautiful and desired. "Bruce and I were just working on some late-night reports." The baby kicked hard against Lauren's ribs as if sensing her distress. She pressed both hands to her belly, finally finding her voice. "Why?" The word came out broken, Barely a whisper. Bruce laughed. Actually laughed. And reached for the champagne bottle to pour the remaining drops into one of the glasses. Because I can, sweetheart. Because you've turned into nothing more than an incubator on legs. And Chloe here. He gestured casually at the woman wearing Lauren's robe. In Lauren's bed, in Lauren's life. Chloe is everything you used to be before you got all maternal. The words hit Lauren like physical blows. Each syllable carved away another piece of the woman she thought she was, the wife she believed herself to be, the future she'd been carrying inside her womb and her heart. Chloe giggled, a sound that would have been sweet in any other context, but here felt like nails on glass. She leaned over to kiss Bruce's cheek, her eyes never leaving Lauren's face. Oh, don't be too hard on her, baby. Pregnancy brain is real. Lauren felt the room tilt. The walls, once warm and inviting, now seemed to press in on her. The baby moved again, and she realized she was crying. Not the graceful tears of movies, but ugly, choking sobs that made her shoulders shake and her vision blur. Bruce pointed toward the door with the same casual gesture he'd used to dismiss a server at a restaurant. Close the door on your way out, would you? We're not done here. Lauren stumbled backward, the ultrasound envelope falling from her nerveless fingers to scatter across the hardwood floor. Images of their unborn child, tiny fingers, a perfect profile. The face they'd been waiting to meet lay scattered like broken promises at her feet. As she turned to leave, she heard Chloe's voice one more time. Don't forget to lock the front door. We wouldn't want any more interruptions. The laughter that followed, Bruce's deep chuckle mixing with Chloe's higher pitch, would echo in Lauren's ears long after she reached the elevator, long after the doors closed on the life she thought she knew, long after she realized that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who destroy you with the greatest precision. The elevator descended, carrying her away from everything she'd believed in, toward an uncertain future she'd have to face alone. But as the floors ticked by, something small and fierce began to stir inside her. Not just the baby, but something else. Something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, being alone was better than being betrayed in her own home, in her own bed, by the man who'd promised to love and protect her until death do them part. What would you do if you caught your husband cheating in your bed, wearing your clothes, while you're 7 months pregnant with his child? Would you walk away, or make them pay? The lobby of the penthouse building felt like a mausoleum as Lauren stumbled toward the exit, her vision still blurred from tears and shock. The marble floors that had once seemed elegant now felt cold and unforgiving beneath her feet. Each step echoed her humiliation, bouncing off the pristine walls like accusations she couldn't escape. Mrs. Mitchell? The voice stopped her just as she reached the revolving door. Miguel Santos, the evening concierge, rushed from behind his mahogany desk, his weathered face creased with concern. In his mid-50s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work, Miguel had always been more than just building staff to Lauren. He remembered her birthday, asked about her pregnancy appointments, and always had a warm smile when she returned from her morning walks. Now those same eyes reflected something she'd never seen before, a mixture of worry and what looked like guilt. Mrs. Mitchell, you shouldn't be driving like this, he said softly, reaching into his jacket pocket. Let me call you a car. Please sit down for a moment. Lauren wanted to refuse, to maintain some shred of dignity, but her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. She sank into one of the leather chairs near the concierge desk, her hands still protectively cradling her belly. The baby seemed restless, responding to her elevated heart rate and stress. Miguel disappeared briefly behind his desk, returning with a bottle of water and a small manila envelope. He glanced around the empty lobby, then pulled his chair closer to hers, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to know something. What I'm about to give you, I could lose my job, but I have a daughter your age, and if someone did this to her, he shook his head, pressing the envelope into her trembling hands. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed quiet. Lauren stared at the envelope, her name written in Miguel's careful handwriting. What is this? Proof, he said simply. Mr. Mitchell, he told all of us staff to keep quiet about Miss Summers. Said anyone who mentioned seeing her here would be fired immediately. But I kept records. Security footage from the hallway cameras, noise complaints from neighbors, maintenance requests to clean up after their meetings. The words hit Lauren like a second wave of betrayal. How long? Miguel's face tightened. 6 months, maybe more. Always when you were at your doctor appointments or visiting your mother in Connecticut. He had it all planned out, Mrs. Mitchell. Even had me send flowers to your office on the days she stayed over, so you wouldn't suspect anything. The water bottle slipped from Lauren's numb fingers, rolling across the marble floor. 6 months. While she'd been growing their child, planning their future, Bruce had been systematically destroying everything they'd built together. The flowers she'd thought were romantic gestures had been guilt offerings designed to cover his tracks. There's more, Miguel continued, his voice heavy with regret. The complaints from the Hendersons in 31A about loud music and other noises. Mrs. Chen from 31C called 3 times about inappropriate behavior in the hallway. I documented everything because I knew something wasn't right, but I was afraid to say anything. I needed this job. Lauren opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were printed emails, time-stamped security reports, and photocopied complaint forms. Page after page of evidence showing that her husband's affair hadn't been a moment of weakness. It had been a calculated campaign of humiliation, carried out in her own building, under her own roof, while she carried his child. One email in particular made her stomach turn. It was from Bruce to the building management company. Effective immediately, all staff are prohibited from discussing the comings and goings of my guests with my wife. Any violations will result in immediate termination. This is a matter of privacy and security. Privacy and security. He'd turned their home into his personal brothel and called it privacy. Mrs. Mitchell, Miguel said gently, there's something else you need to know. Miss Summers, she's been telling people in the building that you're just a surrogate. That once the baby is born, she and Mr. Mitchell are going to raise it together, and you'll be out of the picture. The words hit Lauren like a physical blow. She doubled over, her hand pressed to her mouth as nausea washed over her. Not only had Bruce betrayed her, but he and Chloe had been planning to take her child too. In their minds, she really was just an incubator, a temporary inconvenience to be discarded once her biological function was complete. I'm calling you a car now, Miguel said, already reaching for his phone. But Mrs. Mitchell, you need to fight this. You need to make them pay for what they've done. That baby deserves better than parents who would throw away a good woman like she's nothing. As they waited for the car, Miguel shared more details that painted an even darker picture. How Chloe had started using Lauren's parking space, claiming it was more convenient. How she'd asked the cleaning lady which perfume Lauren wore because she wanted to try something new. How Bruce had started staying out later and later, claiming work emergencies that never seemed to exist during business hours. The saddest part, Miguel said as headlights appeared through the lobby windows, was watching you come home excited about baby things, decorating the nursery, while they were upstairs making plans to steal your life. The ride to her best friend's apartment in Brooklyn passed in a blur of city lights and tears. Lauren clutched the envelope to her chest like a lifeline, feeling something new stirring inside her alongside the grief and humiliation. It was small at first, barely noticeable, but growing stronger with each mile between her and the penthouse. It was rage, not the explosive, destructive kind that burned out quickly, but something colder, more calculated, the kind of anger that came from being systematically betrayed by the person who was supposed to protect her, who had sworn before God and witnesses to love and cherish her until death do them part. When the car pulled up to Nalani Rodriguez's brownstone, Lauren felt the baby kick again. But this time it felt different, not distressed but determined, as if the little one inside her was saying, "We're going to be okay, Mom. We're going to make sure of it." Lauren stepped out of the car, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the door. Behind her, Manhattan's skyline glittered with possibilities and promises. Tomorrow she would begin to discover just how much power a betrayed woman with proof could wield. Bruce and Chloe had made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated her. They saw a pregnant wife as weak, disposable, easily discarded. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Nalani Rodriguez had always been the type of friend who kept emergency chocolate in her freezer and tissues in every room. But when she opened her door at 11:47 p.m. to find Lauren collapsed on her doorstep, clutching a manila envelope like her life depended on it, she knew this was beyond chocolate and tears. "Jesus, Lauren, what happened to you?" Nalani pulled her inside, her artist's hands steady as she guided her pregnant friend to the worn velvet couch that had witnessed countless late-night conversations over the past decade. Lauren couldn't speak. The words were there, trapped behind the knot in her throat, fighting to escape alongside sobs that felt like they might tear her apart. Instead, she handed Nalani the envelope and watched her best friend's face transform from concern to fury as she read Miguel's carefully documented evidence. "That bastard," Nalani whispered, her Puerto Rican accent thickening the way it always did when she was angry. That absolute piece of human garbage. She set the papers aside and knelt beside Lauren, her dark eyes blazing with protective rage. "Mija, tell me everything. From the beginning." So Lauren did. She told her about the music, the champagne glasses, Chloe wearing her robe like a costume in some twisted play. She told her about Bruce's dismissive laughter, about being called an incubator, about the way Chloe had kissed his cheek while staring directly at her like she was marking territory. With each detail, Nalani's expression grew darker. By the time Lauren finished, her friend was pacing the small living room like a caged panther, her hands clenched into fists. 6 months, Nalani said, more to herself than to Lauren. 6 fucking months while you were growing his child, dealing with morning sickness, decorating that nursery. She stopped pacing and turned to face Lauren. "And this bitch thinks she's going to take your baby? Over my dead body." Lauren wiped her eyes with a tissue that appeared in Nalani's hand as if by magic. "What am I supposed to do, Nala? I can't go back there. I can't face them again." "You're not going back," Nalani said firmly. "You're staying here until we figure this out, but first we're calling Richard." "Richard?" "Richard Castellanos. Remember him from art school? He became a lawyer, specializes in family law and divorce cases. Ruthless as hell in court, but he's good people." Nalani was already reaching for her phone. "I've been saving his number for when my cousin's ex-husband finally crossed the line. Looks like we're using it sooner than expected." It was nearly midnight, but Nalani called anyway. Lauren listened to one side of a rapid-fire conversation in which her friend explained the situation with the fury of a protective sister and the precision of someone who understood exactly how much damage had been done. "He'll see us tomorrow at 9 a.m., Nalani announced, hanging up. "Emergency consultation. Richard says what Bruce did, especially the systematic hiding of the affair and the planning to take your baby. It's not just infidelity. It's financial and emotional abuse, and apparently there are laws about that." Lauren felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly, not yet, but something that felt like the possibility of hope. What if he can't help? What if Bruce has better lawyers? Nalani sat back down beside her, taking Lauren's hands in her own. "Mija, let me tell you something. Richard Castellanos doesn't lose cases like this. You know why? Because he takes it personal when rich men think they can throw away good women like trash. His own mother went through something similar when he was a kid. Trust me, Bruce picked the wrong pregnant woman to fuck over." They spent the next hour going through Miguel's evidence more carefully. Each document painted a clearer picture of Bruce's calculated cruelty. The emails to building management weren't just about privacy. They were about control, about making sure Lauren remained isolated and unaware, while her life was systematically dismantled around her. "Look at this," Nalani said, pointing to a security report. 3 in the morning, Chloe leaving the building wearing your Hermes coat. The one your grandmother left you. Lauren's blood ran cold. The coat had been a gift from her late grandmother, a woman who had survived the Depression and 2 wars with nothing but dignity and determination. To see it reduced to something for Bruce's mistress to steal felt like a desecration of everything her family had stood for. "And this," Nalani continued, her voice getting harder with each revelation. "A complaint from Mrs. Henderson about finding women's underwear in the hallway outside your apartment. Designer underwear. Guess whose size?" The humiliation was complete. Not only had Bruce betrayed her in their bed, but he'd allowed Chloe to flaunt it in front of their neighbors, turning Lauren into the subject of building gossip and pity. Every person who rode the elevator with her, every neighbor who smiled politely in the lobby knew something she hadn't. "There's more," Nalani said grimly, pulling out her laptop. "While you were crying, I did some digging. Social media, public records, the works." She turned the screen toward Lauren. "Your husband's little girlfriend has been very busy online." The screen showed Chloe's Instagram account, filled with carefully curated photos that made Lauren's stomach turn. Pictures of expensive restaurants Lauren recognized as places she'd been with Bruce. Close-ups of jewelry that looked suspiciously like pieces from Lauren's own collection, including the diamond bracelet Bruce had given her for their 2nd anniversary. But the worst was a photo from just 2 weeks ago. Chloe in Lauren's penthouse, sitting in Lauren's chair, with a caption that made Lauren's blood boil. "Home sweet home. Some women just don't appreciate what they have. Blessed mark new beginnings. Taking my place." "She posted this while you were at your baby shower," Nalani said quietly. The baby shower Bruce said he couldn't attend because of a work emergency. The final piece of Lauren's old life crumbled away. The emergency that had kept Bruce from celebrating their upcoming child had been Chloe, posting Instagram photos from their home like she already lived there, like Lauren was already gone. But as the last of her illusions died, something else was being born. Lauren could feel it growing alongside the child in her womb, a cold, calculating fury that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with justice. "Nala," she said, her voice steadier than it had been all night, "I want you to screenshot everything. Every post, every caption, every comment. Save it all." Nalani grinned, the first genuine smile either of them had managed all night. "Now you're talking, Mija. That's the Lauren I know. The one who graduated summa cum laude, who built her own business from nothing, who doesn't take shit from anyone." As they worked through the night, documenting every piece of evidence, every cruel detail of Bruce and Chloe's campaign against her, Lauren felt herself changing. The broken woman who had fled the penthouse was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. By dawn, they had assembled a case that would have made a prosecutor weep with joy. Financial records showing Bruce using joint accounts to fund his affair. Social media evidence of Chloe's systematic invasion of Lauren's life. Documentation of their plan to steal her child and throw her away like yesterday's newspaper. "You know what the best part is?" Nalani said as the sun rose over Brooklyn, casting golden light through the windows of her small apartment. "They think they've already won. Bruce probably slept like a baby last night, thinking he got rid of you so easily. Chloe's probably already planning how to redecorate your penthouse." Lauren placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements as if in response to her newfound determination. "Let them think that," she said quietly. "Let them think I'm broken and helpless and gone forever. It'll make their fall so much harder." At 8:45 a.m., they walked into Richard Castellanos' office, Lauren carrying herself with a dignity that had been forged in fire and tears. Behind them, they left the woman who had been Bruce Mitchell's wife. Ahead of them waited justice. Richard Castellanos' office on the 35th floor of a Manhattan high-rise was nothing like the sterile, intimidating law firms Lauren had imagined. Warm wood paneling, family photos, and a small Puerto Rican flag on his desk made the space feel more like a trusted friend's study than a lawyer's lair. But the man himself, tall, sharp-eyed, with silver threading through his black hair, radiated the kind of quiet intensity that made opposing counsel nervous. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, rising from behind his desk as Lauren and Nalani entered. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, but I'm glad you came to me." His handshake was firm, his voice carrying the trace of an accent that spoke of roots in the Bronx. "Nalani filled me in on the basics last night, but I need to hear everything from you. No detail is too small, no humiliation too personal to share. In family court, details win cases." Lauren settled into the leather chair across from his desk, feeling the baby shift as she tried to find a comfortable position. The morning sickness had been particularly brutal today, but she'd forced herself to eat the toast Nalani had insisted on, knowing she needed strength for whatever lay ahead. "Before we begin," Richard continued, opening a thick file folder, "I want you to understand something. What your husband did, the systematic deception, the financial abuse, the emotional cruelty while you're carrying his child, these aren't just moral failures. They're legal vulnerabilities, and I specialize in turning vulnerabilities into victories." For the next 2 hours, Lauren recounted every painful detail, while Richard took notes in careful, precise handwriting. He asked questions that cut straight to the heart of Bruce's deceptions. When did the joint account spending increase? Which specific items had Chloe stolen or appropriated? What witnesses could verify the timeline of the affair? But it was when Lauren mentioned the penthouse that Richard's eyes truly lit up. "Wait," he said, setting down his pen. "You said the penthouse was purchased with your inheritance before the marriage?" "Yes, my grandmother left me her estate. I used it all to buy the penthouse as a surprise wedding gift to Bruce. I thought it would be our fresh start together." Richard leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And whose name is on the deed?" "Mine. The Lauren Mitchell Revocable Trust. Bruce insisted on it for tax purposes. Said it would be better for his business reputation if I was the official owner." "Mrs. Mitchell?" Richard said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a chess master who'd just seen checkmate in 3 moves. "Your husband may have just handed us the key to everything. In New York, property acquired before marriage with separate funds remains separate property, especially when held in trust. Bruce has been living in your house rent-free, while carrying on his affair under your roof. Nalani leaned forward. What does that mean exactly? It means, Richard said, pulling out legal documents from his file, that we can seek immediate exclusive use of the marital residence for Lauren. Bruce has no legal claim to stay there, especially not while conducting an extramarital affair that poses emotional distress to the pregnant wife, who actually owns the property. Lauren felt her heart race, but not with fear this time. You mean I can kick him out? Better than that. We can have him legally removed along with his girlfriend and get a court order preventing them from returning. But first, we need to document everything they've done. Richard turned to his computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Nalani sent me the social media evidence last night. I've already had my investigator run background checks on both Bruce and Miss Summers. The results are illuminating. He turned the screen toward them, showing a detailed report that made Lauren's jaw drop. Chloe Summers hadn't been Bruce's first affair. She was just the most brazen. Credit card records showed a pattern of expensive gifts to various women over the past 3 years, all funded from accounts that Lauren's income had helped build. But here's the best part, Richard continued, clicking to another page. Miss Summers has been documenting everything herself. Every stolen item, every night spent in your home, every meal eaten at your table. She's created a perfect timeline of trespassing, theft, and adultery. The Instagram posts that had seemed like salt in Lauren's wounds now looked like evidence in a prosecutor's case file. Chloe wearing Lauren's grandmother's coat was theft. Chloe posting photos from inside the penthouse was proof of unlawful presence. The caption about taking my place could be used to demonstrate intentional infliction of emotional distress. What about Bruce? Lauren asked. What happens to him? Richard's smile turned predatory. Your husband made a fatal error, Mrs. Mitchell. He used marital assets to fund his affair, then threatened building staff to cover it up. That's not just adultery. It's financial misconduct and intimidation. In New York, those actions can affect everything from spousal support to asset division. He pulled out another document. Based on the evidence we have, I'm filing for emergency relief today. We're asking for exclusive use of the penthouse, immediate financial support for you and the baby, and a restraining order against both Bruce and Miss Summers. But most importantly, we're asking for an immediate accounting of all marital assets. What does that mean? Lauren asked. It means every penny Bruce spent on his affairs gets calculated as a debt he owes to the marriage. Every hotel room, every dinner, every piece of jewelry he bought for his girlfriends, he'll have to pay that back to you with interest. Nalani whistled low. How much are we talking about? Richard consulted his notes. Based on preliminary credit card analysis, approximately $127,000 over 3 years. Not including the value of stolen personal items or the cost of your emotional distress. Lauren felt the baby kick hard, as if in approval. $127,000. More than enough to secure her future as a single mother, to ensure her child wanted for nothing while Bruce faced the consequences of his choices. There's one more thing, Richard said, his voice growing serious. The building staff who helped document this affair, Miguel Santos in particular, they took a real risk to help you. Bruce threatened their jobs, their livelihoods. We need to make sure they're protected. How? By making Bruce's threats part of the public record. When we file these motions, his intimidation tactics become evidence of his character. No court looks kindly on a man who threatens working-class families to hide his adultery. As Richard's assistant prepared the emergency filings, Lauren felt a transformation completing itself inside her. The woman who had walked into this office was still hurt, still pregnant, still betrayed. But she was no longer powerless. How long before Bruce knows what's happening? She asked. He'll be served the papers this afternoon, Richard replied. Probably while he's at work in front of his colleagues. The restraining order will be delivered by a sheriff's deputy, which tends to draw attention in corporate environments. Lauren imagined Bruce's face when the papers were served, when his carefully constructed image as a successful businessman crumbled in front of his peers. When Chloe realized that her Instagram posts had provided evidence for her own legal destruction. Mrs. Mitchell, Richard said as they prepared to leave, I want you to prepare yourself for retaliation. Men like Bruce don't take legal consequences well. He'll try to intimidate you, to make you drop the case. That's why the restraining order is so important. Let him try, Lauren said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. I'm not the same woman he threw out yesterday, and I'm not going anywhere. As the elevator descended from Richard's office, Lauren placed both hands on her belly and spoke to her unborn child. It's just you and me now, baby. But don't worry, Mommy's got this handled. Behind them, 35 floors up, A lawyer was filing papers that would destroy Bruce Mitchell's world as thoroughly as he had destroyed his wife's. The war had officially begun. At 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday that would forever divide Bruce Mitchell's life into before and after, Deputy Sheriff Dante Morales walked into the chrome and glass offices of Pinnacle Investment Group, carrying a leather portfolio that contained the legal destruction of a man's carefully constructed world. Bruce was in his corner office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, the one that cost more per month than most people's salaries, when his assistant, Kimberly, knocked with the kind of urgency that usually meant either a major client emergency or a market crash. "Mr. Mitchell, there's a sheriff's deputy here to see you. He says it's official business." Bruce barely looked up from his computer screen where he was reviewing quarterly projections, a half-eaten sandwich from the expensive deli downstairs sitting beside his coffee. "Tell him to make an appointment. I'm busy." "Sir, he says he needs to serve you papers personally. He can't leave without doing it." The words "serve papers" cut through Bruce's concentration like a blade. He looked up to see Deputy Morales standing in his doorway, tall and professional in his uniform, holding an official-looking envelope. Behind him, Bruce could see faces peering over cubicle walls, his colleagues and subordinates suddenly very interested in what was happening in the boss's office. "Bruce Mitchell?" Deputy Morales asked, his voice carrying just enough authority to make the entire floor go quiet. "Yes," Bruce replied, his throat suddenly dry. "You're being served with emergency family court documents. I need to verify your identity and have you sign for receipt." The envelope felt heavier than it should have when Deputy Morales placed it in Bruce's hands. Around him, the office had gone cemetery quiet, 30 pairs of eyes watching as one of the firm's most successful partners was publicly served with legal papers like a common criminal. "What is this about?" Bruce asked, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. "Sir, I'm just here to deliver the documents. You'll need to read them for details." Deputy Morales's voice was professional, but carried an undertone that suggested he'd read the papers himself and didn't much like what he'd seen. Bruce's hands shook slightly as he signed the receipt, aware that his signature was being witnessed by every person in the office. The moment Deputy Morales left, the whispers started, a low buzz of speculation that would only grow louder as the afternoon wore on. Back in his office with the door closed, Bruce tore open the envelope with the desperation of a man afraid of what he might find. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at him like accusation written in fire. Emergency motion for exclusive use of marital residence. Restraining order against respondent and third-party Chloe Summers. Immediate accounting of marital assets and reimbursement for dissipated funds. Documentation of systematic financial and emotional abuse. The papers slipped from his nerveless fingers, scattering across his mahogany desk like the pieces of his shattered life. Lauren wasn't supposed to fight back. She was supposed to disappear quietly, take whatever scraps he offered, and let him move on with Chloe without complications. But these papers told a different story. They spoke of evidence, witnesses, financial records that traced every dollar he'd spent on his affairs. They mentioned social media posts, building security footage, statements from staff members he thought he'd successfully intimidated into silence. His phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Babe, there are cops at my apartment building. What's going on?" Before Bruce could respond, another text arrived. "They served me papers, too. Something about restraining orders and trespassing? Call me now." Bruce's chest tightened. If Chloe had been served at her apartment, that meant neighbors, building staff, maybe even her roommate had witnessed it. The woman who had been so proud of their secret affair, who had posted about it online like a trophy, was now discovering that secrets had a way of becoming very public when they ended up in court documents. A knock on his door interrupted his panic. "Mr. Mitchell?" It was Kimberly again, her voice tentative. "Mr. Hawthorne wants to see you in his office immediately." Jeremiah Hawthorne, the senior partner, was not a man who tolerated scandal in his firm. His office was a temple to old money and older morals, filled with leather-bound law books and portraits of stern-faced men who had built the firm's reputation on discretion and respectability. "Sit down, Bruce," Hawthorne said, his voice carrying the chill of a January morning. He was holding a printout that Bruce recognized with horror as a copy of the court documents. "Want to explain to me why I just got a call from our building security about a sheriff serving you papers in front of half our staff? It's a personal matter, Jer. Nothing that affects the firm." Hawthorne's laugh was as warm as a glacier. "Nothing that affects the firm? Bruce, you've been served with papers alleging financial misconduct, intimidation of witnesses, and systematic abuse of your pregnant wife. Do you have any idea what this does to our reputation if it gets out? It won't get out. It's just Lauren being dramatic because she's pregnant and emotional. Emotional? Hawthorne slapped the papers down on his desk. According to this, you've been using firm resources to conduct an affair with your assistant, threatening building staff to cover it up, and stealing your wife's personal property to give to your mistress. That's not emotional, Bruce. That's criminal. The room felt like it was shrinking around Bruce. The personal property thing is exaggerated. Chloe borrowed a few things. Borrowed? Your wife's grandmother's heirloom coat? Jewelry that belonged to her family? And then this woman had the audacity to post photos of herself wearing stolen items on social media? Hawthorne's voice was rising. Decades of controlled anger finally finding release. Do you understand that our clients expect a certain level of moral character from their financial advisors? Do you think Mrs. Pemberton is going to trust her portfolio to a man who steals from his pregnant wife to impress his girlfriend? Bruce felt sweat beading on his forehead. Mrs. Pemberton controlled a $50 million investment account, one of the firm's largest clients. Jer, please. We can handle this quietly. Quietly? Bruce, your girlfriend posted evidence of your crimes on Instagram. She documented every theft, every night spent in property that doesn't belong to you, every stolen item she paraded around like a trophy. There's nothing quiet about this disaster. The intercom on Hawthorne's desk buzzed. Mr. Hawthorne? Mrs. Mitchell's attorney is on line 1. He says it's urgent. Bruce's blood turned to ice water. Richard Castellanos was calling the firm directly, bringing Lauren's legal war right into the heart of Bruce's professional life. Hawthorne picked up the phone. This is Jeremiah Hawthorne. Yes, Mr. Castellanos, I'm aware of the situation. I see. Yes, the firm takes these allegations very seriously. We'll be conducting our own internal investigation. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. He hung up and turned back to Bruce with eyes that could have frozen hellfire. That was your wife's attorney. He wanted to inform us that they have evidence of you using firm resources, email accounts, office phones, company credit cards, to conduct and cover up your affair. He was very gracious in giving us the opportunity to cooperate with their investigation, rather than having us served with subpoenas. Bruce's world tilted sideways. I never used company resources. The email to building management threatening staff members was sent from your firm account, Bruce, at 2:30 p.m. on a Wednesday while you were supposed to be working on the Henderson portfolio. Every word hit Bruce like a physical blow. The careful compartmentalization he'd maintained between his professional and personal lives was crumbling, revealing a web of lies and abuse that painted him not as a successful businessman having a discreet affair, but as a predator who had used every resource at his disposal to hurt the woman who loved him. Effective immediately, Hawthorne continued. You're suspended pending a full investigation. Security will escort you out. Don't bother cleaning out your desk. We'll have everything searched and cataloged as potential evidence. As Bruce walked through the office, escorted by security guards, past the faces of colleagues who no longer met his eyes, past the assistant who had witnessed his humiliation, he realized that Lauren hadn't just taken his home away from him. She had taken everything. Chloe Summers had always believed that confidence could overcome any obstacle. At 27, she'd climbed from a filing clerk in Queens to executive assistant to one of Manhattan's most powerful investment managers through a combination of ambition, calculated charm, and the kind of ruthless opportunism that mistook cruelty for strength. But confidence, she was discovering, meant nothing when 2 NYPD officers were standing in the hallway of her Astoria apartment building at 3:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, holding official court documents while her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, watched through a crack in her door like it was better than her afternoon soap operas. Chloe Summers, Officer Reina Martinez asked, her voice professionally neutral but her eyes taking in every detail of the woman who had documented her own crimes on social media. Yes, that's me, Chloe replied, trying to summon the breathy confidence that had always worked on Bruce and his business associates. Is there some kind of mistake? No mistake, ma'am. You're being served with a restraining order and notice of civil action. Officer Martinez handed her the thick envelope with the kind of efficiency that suggested she'd done this many times before. You need to read this carefully and comply immediately. Chloe's hands trembled as she signed for the documents, acutely aware that Mrs. Kowalski was probably texting the building's gossip network before the officers even reached the elevator. The Instagram posts that had made her feel powerful and victorious now seemed like breadcrumbs leading directly to this moment of public humiliation. Inside her small studio apartment, A far cry from Bruce's penthouse with its IKEA furniture and subway tile bathroom. Chloe spread the legal papers across her kitchen table with growing horror. The language was dense and formal, but certain phrases cut through the legalese like accusations written in her own blood. Restraining order. Defendant is hereby prohibited from entering, visiting, or remaining within 500 feet of the property located at civil action for theft of personal property, including but not limited to designer clothing, jewelry, family heirlooms, intentional infliction of emotional distress, defendant's systematic documentation and public display of adultery while plaintiff was pregnant, but it was the attachment labeled Exhibit A, social media evidence, that made Chloe's stomach drop into her designer shoes. Page after page of her own Instagram posts, screenshots of captions she'd written in moments of triumph, photos she'd taken to hurt Lauren now twisted into proof of her own malicious intent. There was the photo of her wearing Lauren's grandmother's coat, captioned, "Vintage looks better on some people than others. Upgrade complete." The image of her sitting in Lauren's chair with "Home Sweet Home. Some women just don't appreciate what they have. Nar blessed mag are taking my place." The close-up of the diamond bracelet with "When you finally get what you deserve. Worth it, not a new life." Each post, each smug caption, each calculated cruelty was now evidence in a legal proceeding that could destroy her life as thoroughly as she'd tried to destroy Lauren's. Her phone buzzed with a call from her roommate Destiny, who worked at a trendy boutique in Soho and had witnessed the police visit from across the street. "Chloe, what the hell is going on?" Destiny's voice carried the kind of horrified fascination people usually reserved for car accidents. "Mrs. K is telling everyone you got arrested." "I didn't get arrested," Chloe snapped, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "It's just some legal thing with Bruce's crazy wife." "Legal thing? Girl, there were 2 cops in the hallway for 20 minutes. That's not just a legal thing." Before Chloe could respond, another call was coming in, this one from Bruce. She answered immediately, desperate for reassurance that this was all just Lauren's emotional overreaction that would blow over in a few days. "Bruce, thank God. These papers, they served me. They're saying I can't come to the penthouse anymore and—" "Chloe," his voice was flat, defeated in a way she'd never heard before. "We need to talk. In person. Meet me at the coffee shop on 42nd. Why can't you come here? Or I could come to—" "You can't come to the penthouse anymore. Didn't you read the restraining order? And I can't come to you because—" His voice broke slightly. "Because I got suspended from work today. Security escorted me out in front of everyone." The coffee shop Bruce chose was the kind of generic chain where nobody looked twice at quietly desperate conversations. Chloe arrived first, her hands still shaking as she ordered a latte she wouldn't drink, and tried to process the reality that her Instagram account, her carefully curated display of triumph over Lauren, had become the evidence for her own legal destruction. When Bruce walked in 15 minutes later, Chloe barely recognized him. Gone was the confident businessman who had made her feel like she was winning a war against his weak, pregnant wife. This man looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single afternoon. His expensive suit wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled, his eyes carrying the hollow look of someone who had lost everything that mattered. "They know everything," he said without preamble, slumping into the chair across from her. "Every hotel, every restaurant, every gift I bought you. They have credit card records, security footage, staff statements, and your Instagram account." He looked at her like she'd personally betrayed him. "Jesus Christ, Chloe, you documented everything. Every stolen item, every night in her house, every cruel thing we did to her." "I didn't steal anything," Chloe protested weakly. "You gave me those things. I gave you things that belonged to my wife. Her grandmother's coat, her jewelry, her perfume. And you posted photos of yourself wearing them with captions about how you were replacing her." Bruce's voice was getting louder, drawing looks from other customers. "Do you understand what that looks like in court? Do you understand what you've done to us?" Chloe felt tears starting to form, but not from remorse. From the dawning realization that the game she thought she was winning had rules she'd never understood. What happens now? Now Lauren gets the house because it was always hers. Now I owe her 6 figures in reimbursement for what I spent on you. Now my career is probably over because the firm is investigating me for using company resources to cover up our affair. He looked at her with something approaching hatred. Now you're banned from going anywhere near her or the baby, and she's suing you personally for theft and emotional distress. She can't sue me. I didn't do anything illegal. Bruce laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You posted evidence of theft on social media, Chloe. You documented emotional abuse of a pregnant woman. You turned your crimes into content. He pulled out his phone and showed her something that made her blood freeze. And now it's been screenshotted and saved by her lawyer. Every post, every comment, every cruel caption. It's all evidence now. The screen showed her own Instagram account, but the post looked different now. Not like victories, but like confessions. The casual cruelty that had felt so satisfying when she was hurting Lauren now looked like the documented behavior of someone who took pleasure in causing pain to a vulnerable woman. I need you to delete everything, Bruce said, his voice urgent. Every post about Lauren, about the penthouse, about us. Delete it all before. It's too late for that, a familiar voice said behind them. Chloe turned to see a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit approaching their table. She recognized him from the courthouse photos Destiny had shown her after Googling Lauren's lawyer. Richard Castellanos looked exactly like the kind of attorney who destroyed people for a living. Mr. Mitchell, Miss Summers, Richard said, pulling out the chair between them without invitation. I'm Richard Castellanos, Mrs. Mitchell's attorney. I wanted to speak with you both before tomorrow's hearing. Bruce's face went white. You can't talk to us without our lawyers present. You're absolutely right. But since neither of you has retained counsel yet, and since Miss Summers has been trying to delete evidence for the past hour, yes, we're monitoring her social media activity. I thought I'd save us all some time. Richard placed a tablet on the table showing screenshots of Chloe's Instagram account with timestamps. Destroying evidence is a serious matter, Miss Summers. I'd hate for you to make your legal situation worse. Chloe stared at the screen, watching her own posts disappear in real time as she tried to delete them, not realizing that every action was being recorded by Lauren's legal team. What do you want? Bruce asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made smart people very nervous. I want you to understand exactly how much trouble you're both in, and I want to give you one chance to make this easier on yourselves. As Richard Castellanos laid out the evidence that would destroy their lives in court, Chloe realized that every photo she'd posted, every cruel caption she'd written, every moment of triumph over Lauren had been building toward this moment, when her own words would be used to destroy her. The game was over, and she'd been playing for the wrong team all along. The Manhattan Family Court building on Lafayette Street had witnessed thousands of broken marriages, custody battles, and financial disputes, but Judge Esperanza Vasquez had rarely seen a case that combined such systematic cruelty with such meticulous self-documentation by the perpetrators. At 9 a.m. sharp, Lauren Mitchell walked into courtroom 341 with the bearing of a woman who had discovered that justice was not something that happened to you. It was something you fought for. At 8 months pregnant now, she moved with careful dignity, her hand resting protectively on her belly as Richard Castellanos guided her to their table. Across the aisle, Bruce Mitchell sat with his hastily retained attorney, Gideon Walsh, a man whose expensive suit couldn't quite hide the desperate energy of someone who had taken a case that was already lost. Bruce looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually perfect appearance replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of a man watching his life unravel in real time. Chloe sat in the gallery behind him, no longer the confident woman who had posed in stolen clothes and posted cruel captions. Her designer outfit, purchased with money Bruce had spent on their affair, now seemed like costume jewelry at a bankruptcy sale. She kept glancing at her phone, as if the Instagram account that had destroyed her life might somehow offer salvation. Your Honor, Richard began when Judge Vasquez called the case. We're here today because Mr. Mitchell believed he could systematically abuse his pregnant wife, steal her property to give to his mistress, and intimidate witnesses to cover his tracks. What he didn't count on was that his girlfriend would document every crime on social media, creating a perfect timeline of their malicious behavior. Bruce's attorney stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making inflammatory statements rather than presenting facts. Judge Vasquez looked at Walsh with the patience of someone who had heard every desperate defense strategy. Mr. Walsh, I've reviewed the evidence. The inflammatory part isn't the attorney's description, it's your client's behavior. Please proceed, Mr. Castellanos. Richard activated the courtroom's projection system, filling the large screen with images that made several spectators gasp. Chloe's Instagram posts appeared one by one, her wearing Lauren's grandmother's coat sitting in Lauren's chair, displaying Lauren's jewelry, each image time-stamped and accompanied by captions that revealed the calculated cruelty behind every stolen moment. Your Honor, Richard continued, Miss Summers didn't just steal my client's property, she celebrated it. She turned theft into performance art, emotional abuse into entertainment. Look at this caption. Vintage looks better on some people than others. Upgrade complete. This was posted while my client was at a prenatal appointment carrying Mr. Mitchell's child. Judge Vasquez studied the screen with the expression of someone who had seen human nature at its worst and still found new depths to disappoint her. And Mr. Mitchell's role in this performance art? He funded it, enabled it, and covered it up. Richard clicked to the next slide, showing bank records that traced every dollar Bruce had spent on his affair. Hotel rooms, restaurants, jewelry, clothing, all paid for with marital assets while my client used her own inheritance to pay household expenses. But more damaging is this. The screen filled with email correspondence between Bruce and the building management company. His threats to fire staff members who mentioned Chloe's presence. His demands that security footage be deleted. His systematic intimidation of working-class families who depended on their jobs to survive. Miguel Santos, the concierge who had risked his job to help Lauren, sat in the gallery with quiet dignity as his written statement was read aloud. His words carried the weight of a man who had wrestled with his conscience and chosen justice over job security. Your Honor, Walsh interjected desperately, my client's personal relationship choices, while perhaps morally questionable, don't constitute legal grounds for— Mr. Walsh, Judge Vasquez interrupted, are you seriously arguing that systematic theft, witness intimidation, and financial abuse are merely personal relationship choices? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Walsh sat down, apparently realizing that defending Bruce Mitchell was like trying to polish a reputation made of rust and broken glass. Richard continued methodically building his case. Property records showing Lauren's sole ownership of the penthouse. Medical records documenting her stress-related pregnancy complications. Witness statements from neighbors who had endured the noise and disruption of Bruce's affair. Financial records showing the systematic drain of marital assets to fund his relationship with Chloe. But it was when Richard called Lauren to testify that the courtroom fell completely silent. Mrs. Mitchell, Richard said gently, please tell the court how you discovered your husband's affair. Lauren's voice was steady, clear, carrying the strength of someone who had walked through fire and emerged tempered rather than broken. She described finding Bruce and Chloe in their marital bed, the champagne glasses on her baby's crib, the playlist from their wedding providing soundtrack to her humiliation. He called me an incubator, Lauren said, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. He said Chloe was his now, that I was nothing more than a vessel carrying his child. And she laughed. She kissed him while looking at me, like she was marking territory. Judge Vasquez's expression grew colder with each detail. When Lauren described finding her grandmother's coat, a family heirloom from a woman who had survived the Great Depression through dignity and determination, being worn by her husband's mistress in Instagram photos, several people in the gallery made sounds of disgust. Your Honor, Lauren continued, I don't want revenge. I want protection. I want my child to be born into a home where they're safe, where they won't be exposed to the kind of cruelty that treats vulnerable people as disposable. I want the man who promised to love and protect me to face consequences for turning that promise into a weapon. When Lauren stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom remained silent except for the soft sound of Chloe crying, not from remorse, but from the dawning realization that her own posts would be used to destroy her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Judge Vasquez reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity before speaking. Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades separating truth from lies, your behavior represents a level of calculated cruelty that this court finds unconscionable. You systematically abused your pregnant wife's trust, stole her property to fund your affair, intimidated witnesses to cover your tracks, and allowed your mistress to publicly humiliate the mother of your unborn child. Bruce started to speak, but Judge Vasquez held up her hand. Miss Summers, she continued, turning to Chloe, your social media posts demonstrate a level of malicious intent that goes beyond simple adultery. You didn't just participate in this affair, you weaponized it. You turned theft into performance, cruelty into content, and a pregnant woman's pain into your personal entertainment. The judge's voice grew harder with each word. The evidence shows a pattern of behavior so systematic, so deliberately harmful, that this court has no choice but to impose the full range of sanctions available under New York law. Richard Castellanos had won cases before, But as Judge Vasquez began reading her ruling, exclusive use of the penthouse for Lauren, immediate reimbursement of all dissipated funds, expanded restraining orders, and a formal finding of financial and emotional abuse, he knew this was more than a victory. This was justice served with the precision of a surgeon's blade. As the gavel fell, Bruce Mitchell realized that the woman he'd called an incubator had just proven herself to be made of stronger stuff than the man who'd tried to throw her away. The 32nd floor of the Manhattan penthouse had never felt more like home to Lauren Mitchell than it did at 4:17 p.m. on the day the court order was executed. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, her hand resting on her 8-month pregnant belly, watching as Bruce's belongings were methodically packed into boxes by court-appointed movers under the supervision of Deputy Sheriff Dante Morales. "Ma'am, where would you like us to put these?" one of the movers asked, holding up the champagne glasses that had sat on her baby's crib the day she discovered the affair. "Trash," Lauren said without hesitation. "All of it goes in the trash." The symbolic weight of that moment wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The glasses that had celebrated Bruce's betrayal were now being discarded like the relationship itself, broken, worthless, and better off forgotten. Miguel Santos stood near the elevator, having been granted special permission to witness the execution of the court order that had vindicated his courage in speaking truth to power. His presence felt like a blessing on the proceedings, a reminder that sometimes good people still existed in a world that could be unspeakably cruel. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said softly as another box of Bruce's belongings was carried past, "I want you to know how proud I am of what you've done, not just for yourself but for every person who has ever been told to stay quiet when they know something is wrong." Lauren squeezed his weathered hand, feeling tears threaten but refusing to let them fall. Today was not a day for tears. Today was a day for justice served with the precision of a master craftsman. The elevator chimed, and Bruce Mitchell stepped out flanked by his attorney Gideon Walsh, both men carrying the defeated air of soldiers returning from a battle they never should have fought. Bruce's eyes immediately went to the boxes stacked near the elevator, each one containing pieces of the life he had systematically destroyed through his own choices. "This is everything?" Deputy Morales asked, consulting his clipboard with the efficient professionalism of someone who had overseen many court-ordered removals. "Yes, sir," the lead mover confirmed. "Personal clothing, toiletries, business documents that don't relate to joint property. Everything else stays with the property owner." Bruce started toward the master bedroom, but Deputy Morales stepped smoothly into his path. "Sir, the court order is very specific. You can observe the packing to ensure nothing personal is missed, but you cannot enter areas where Mrs. Mitchell has established residence." The words hit Bruce like a physical blow. His own bedroom, where he had betrayed his pregnant wife in the most intimate way possible, was now off-limits to him by order of the court. The bed where he had laughed at Lauren's pain was now her sanctuary, protected by the full weight of New York state law. Lauren watched from across the living room as Bruce surveyed the space that had once been his kingdom. The penthouse looked different now, cleaner somehow, as if removing the source of betrayal had allowed the home's original warmth to reassert itself. The baby's nursery, visible through the open door, had been restored to its intended purpose. No more champagne glasses, no more evidence of adultery, just a peaceful room waiting for the child who would be raised in honesty rather than deception. "Bruce," Lauren said, her voice carrying across the space between them with the authority of someone who had reclaimed her power, "I need you to understand something before you leave." He turned to face her, and she saw in his eyes the hollow recognition of a man who had gambled everything on the assumption that the people he hurt would never fight back. "I'm not doing this to destroy you," she continued, one hand protectively cradling her belly. "I'm doing this to protect our child from growing up thinking that love looks like what you did to me. I'm doing this so they never learn that marriage means one person gets to hurt the other person and call it privacy." Bruce opened his mouth to respond, but Lauren held up her hand in the same gesture Judge Vasquez had used to silence his objections. "You called me an incubator. You said I was nothing. But incubators don't own penthouses worth millions of dollars. Incubators don't have lawyers who specialize in making sure cruel men face consequences for their actions. And incubators certainly don't have the power to make sure justice is served." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "What you see happening here isn't revenge, Bruce. It's accountability. And you're going to live with the consequences of that for the rest of your life." The elevator chimed again and Chloe Summers emerged, her usual confidence replaced by the desperate energy of someone clinging to a sinking ship. She had clearly expected to accompany Bruce as he collected his belongings, perhaps to assert some final claim on the life she had tried to steal. Instead, she found Deputy Morales blocking her path with the immovable authority of court-backed law enforcement. "Miss Summers, you're in violation of a restraining order by being here," he said calmly. "You need to leave immediately or you'll be arrested for contempt of court." "But Bruce said I could," Chloe began, her voice carrying the whining tone of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. "Ma'am," Deputy Morales interrupted, "Mr. Mitchell has no authority to override a court order. The restraining order specifically prohibits you from entering this building. Your presence here is a criminal violation." Lauren watched as the reality settled over Chloe like fog rolling in from the harbor. The woman who had posted photos of herself in Lauren's home, wearing Lauren's clothes, sitting in Lauren's chair, was now legally prohibited from setting foot in the building. The Instagram account that had documented her triumph had become the evidence for her complete banishment. "You can't do this to me," Chloe said, her voice breaking with the kind of desperation that came from watching carefully laid plans collapse into legal rubble. "Bruce, tell them they can't do this to me." Bruce looked at his former mistress with something approaching pity. "Chloe, I can't tell them anything. I'm not even allowed to be here except to collect my belongings under court supervision." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The woman who had believed she was stealing another woman's life had discovered that some things cannot be stolen: dignity, legal ownership, and the protection that comes from being the victim rather than the perpetrator. "Time to go, Miss Summers," Deputy Morales said, his hand moving to his radio in a gesture that suggested arrest was the next logical step in this sequence of events. As Chloe was escorted back to the elevator, Lauren heard her making desperate phone calls trying to find someone, anyone, who could somehow undo the legal reality that had closed around her like a trap built from her own social media posts. "The irony," Richard Castellano said, appearing at Lauren's elbow as the final box was loaded onto the elevator, "is that she created every piece of evidence we used to destroy her. Every cruel post, every stolen moment, every calculated humiliation. She built her own gallows and then climbed up to test the rope." Lauren nodded, watching as Bruce took one last look around the penthouse that would never again be his home. In his eyes, she saw the recognition of a man who had discovered that some games have winners and losers, and that sometimes the person you underestimate most is the one who defeats you most completely. As the elevator doors closed on Bruce Mitchell and his boxed-up belongings, Lauren felt the baby kick, strong, determined movements that felt like applause from the child who would inherit a world where justice had prevailed over cruelty. The penthouse felt quiet, but it was the good kind of quiet. The silence of safety, of home reclaimed, of a future that belonged to people who understood the difference between love and possession. Lauren Mitchell had won more than a court case. She had won back her life. 3 weeks after Bruce Mitchell had been escorted from his former penthouse, the consequences of his choices continued to cascade through his life like dominoes falling in slow motion. The man who had once commanded respect in Manhattan's financial district now sat in a cramped studio apartment in Hoboken, staring at legal documents that outlined the complete destruction of everything he had spent a decade building. The knock on his door came at 7:23 a.m., interrupting his breakfast of instant coffee and stale donuts, a far cry from the catered meals and expense account lunches that had once defined his mornings. Through the peephole, he saw Jeremiah Hawthorne, the senior partner who had once called Bruce the future of the firm, now standing in the hallway with the expression of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Jer," Bruce said, opening the door with the false heartiness of someone desperately trying to pretend his world wasn't collapsing. "What brings you to Jersey? Please come in." Hawthorne stepped into the tiny apartment, his expensive suit looking obscene in the cramped space with its peeling wallpaper and windows that faced a brick wall. His eyes took in the details that told the story of Bruce's fall: unpaid bills stacked on the card table that served as a desk, empty beer bottles that spoke of nights spent drowning in self-pity, and a mattress on the floor because Bruce couldn't afford proper furniture after paying the first installment of his court-ordered reimbursement to Lauren. "Bruce," Hawthorne said without preamble, "I'm here to inform you that the firm's investigation is complete. The partners have voted unanimously. You're terminated for cause, effective immediately." The words hit Bruce like a physical blow. "Jer, please, I know I made mistakes, but my client portfolio alone is worth—" "Your client portfolio?" Hawthorne's voice carried the kind of cold fury that came from having his firm's reputation dragged through the mud. Bruce, do you have any idea what your mistakes have cost us? Mrs. Pemberton pulled her $50 million account the day after your court hearing. The Steinbergs followed 2 days later. By the end of the week, we'd lost over $200 million in managed assets because our clients don't want their money handled by a man who steals from his pregnant wife. Bruce sank onto his mattress, feeling the last pillar of his old life crumble beneath him. But I can rebuild. I can win them back. Hawthorne pulled a newspaper clipping from his jacket pocket, a Society page article with the headline, "Investment Executive's Wife Wins Landmark Abuse Case." The accompanying photo showed Lauren leaving the courthouse, radiant despite her pregnancy, flanked by Richard Castellanos and looking every inch the triumphant survivor she had become. "This," Hawthorne said, dropping the clipping on the card table, "ran in the Post, the Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Your name is now synonymous with financial abuse and spousal cruelty. The New York State Bar is investigating you for professional misconduct. The IRS is auditing 3 years of your tax returns because someone, I suspect Mrs. Mitchell's very thorough attorney, suggested there might be unreported income from your misuse of marital assets." Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of Bruce's former life. The man who had laughed at his pregnant wife's tears was now discovering that actions had consequences that reached far beyond the moment of their commission. "There's more," Hawthorne continued relentlessly. "The firm's insurance company is refusing to cover any claims related to your conduct. They're calling it criminal misuse of company resources. We're personally liable for every dollar of legal fees this mess has cost us, and Bruce," his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, "it's a lot of dollars." Meanwhile, across the Hudson River, Chloe Summers was learning that social media infamy followed different rules than social media fame. Her Instagram account, once her pride and joy, had been permanently suspended after thousands of users reported her posts as evidence of documented abuse. Screenshots of her cruelest captions circulated on Twitter and TikTok, turning her into a cautionary tale about the dangers of weaponizing social media against vulnerable people. Her job at a trendy Soho boutique had lasted exactly 4 days after her arrest for violating the restraining order. The store manager, Indy Blackthorne, had been forced to let her go when customers began recognizing her from news coverage of the court case. "I'm sorry, Chloe," Indy had said, her voice genuinely sympathetic but firm. "But we can't have someone working here who's become famous for stealing from pregnant women. Our customers are mostly young mothers. They see you as the enemy." Now Chloe sat in her shared Astoria apartment, scrolling through job listings on her phone while her roommate Destiny packed boxes in the background. The lease was in Destiny's name, and after 3 weeks of listening to Chloe cry about her legal troubles, Destiny had decided that drama followed Chloe like a shadow, and she didn't want to live in that shadow anymore. "You need to find somewhere else to stay," Destiny had announced that morning. "My cousin's girlfriend works at that boutique where you got fired, and she says people are asking if I'm the roommate of that Instagram psycho who stole from the pregnant lady. I can't afford to have my reputation ruined because of your choices." The apartment hunt had been a nightmare. Every potential roommate who Googled Chloe's name found the court documents, the news articles, the screenshots of her cruelest posts. Who wanted to live with someone famous for documenting their own crimes on social media? Her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Desperately hoping it was someone responding to her roommate ads, Chloe answered immediately. "Miss Summers? This is Detective Rhiannon Torres with the NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like you to come in for questioning regarding possible fraud charges related to your use of stolen credit cards and identity information." Chloe's blood turned to ice water. "I didn't steal any credit cards. Ma'am, using another person's financial information to make purchases, even with their permission, can constitute fraud when the permission was obtained through deceptive means. Your ex-boyfriend's estranged wife has provided evidence that you used her credit cards and personal information without her knowledge or consent." The phone slipped from Chloe's numb fingers. Bruce had given her Lauren's credit card information to make purchases for their affair, telling her it was his card and that Lauren didn't mind. Now that lie was becoming another criminal charge in a legal case that seemed to grow more complex with each passing day. Back in Hoboken, Bruce was discovering that his personal destruction was just beginning. A process server had arrived with papers for 3 separate civil lawsuits, one from Lauren for additional damages, one from the building management company for creating a hostile environment for staff, and one from Pinnacle Investment Group seeking to recover funds he had misappropriated for personal use. But the cruelest irony came in a phone call from Nalani Rodriguez, Lauren's best friend, whose voice carried the satisfaction of someone delivering long overdue justice. "Bruce," she said, "Lauren wanted me to let you know that the baby was born this morning. A healthy daughter, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, perfect in every way." Bruce felt his throat constrict. His daughter, born into a world where he was legally prohibited from being present, where his name was associated with cruelty and abuse, where he had forfeited the right to be called father, through his own systematic destruction of his family. "She also wanted me to tell you," Nalani continued, "that your daughter will grow up knowing that her mother fought for justice, that good people still exist, and that love isn't something you take from others, it's something you build through kindness and respect. She'll learn those lessons from the people who chose to stand up for what's right, instead of hiding behind money and intimidation." The call ended, leaving Bruce alone in his studio apartment with the deafening silence of consequences fully realized. Outside his window, Hoboken continued its daily rhythm, but for Bruce Mitchell, time had stopped at the moment he had laughed at his pregnant wife's pain and told her she was nothing more than an incubator. Now he understood the difference between power and strength, between taking what you want and earning what you deserve. Lauren hadn't just defeated him in court. She had proven that sometimes the people you hurt the most are the ones with the greatest capacity to ensure that justice, delayed though it might be, is never denied. As evening fell over the tiny apartment where the consequences of his cruelty had finally found him, Bruce Mitchell realized that he had learned the hardest lesson of all, that the woman he had called weak had been strong enough to survive his worst, while he had been too weak to survive the truth about himself. 6 months after baby Sophia Mitchell took her first breath in the safety of Mount Sinai Hospital, Lauren stood in the nursery of her penthouse, bathing her daughter in the golden light of a Manhattan sunset. The room that had once been defiled by champagne glasses and evidence of betrayal now hummed with the gentle sounds of new life. Soft coos, the whisper of tiny fingers grasping at sunbeams, and the quiet confidence of a mother who had learned that strength wasn't something you were born with, but something you forged in the fires of adversity. "There's my beautiful girl," Lauren whispered, lifting Sophia from the changing table and marveling at the perfect features that belonged entirely to this new life, untainted by the cruelty that had preceded her birth. "Mama has something to tell you about the world you're growing up in." The penthouse had been transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Where Bruce's cold minimalism had once dominated, warmth now filled every corner. Nalani's artwork graced the walls, vibrant paintings that celebrated resilience and hope. The kitchen island where Lauren had once sat crying over ultrasound photos now held fresh flowers from the farmer's market and handwritten thank you notes from the women's shelter where she volunteered twice a week. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in the study that had once been Bruce's domain. The mahogany desk where he had planned his deceptions now served as Lauren's workspace for the nonprofit foundation she had established with her court-ordered reimbursement money. The Sophia Foundation provided legal assistance to women facing financial abuse during pregnancy, a cause that had grown from Lauren's own experience into a movement that was changing lives across New York. The doorbell's soft chime interrupted her thoughts. Through the intercom, Miguel's familiar voice brought its usual warmth. "Mrs. Mitchell, your guests are here for the celebration." The celebration. 6 months ago, Lauren couldn't have imagined that there would ever be anything worth celebrating again. Now her living room filled with the people who had stood by her during the darkest period of her life, gathering to mark not just Sophia's baptism, but Lauren's official graduation from law school, a degree she had completed while pregnant, during the legal battle, and through the early months of single motherhood. Richard Castellanos arrived first, carrying a bottle of sparkling apple cider and a legal brief that made Lauren smile. "The final settlement check cleared this morning," he announced. "Bruce Mitchell has officially paid every penny he owes you, plus interest and legal fees. His financial punishment is complete." Nalani followed, her arms full of gifts for Sophia and her eyes bright with the pride of someone who had watched her best friend transform from victim to victor. "Mija, you look radiant. Motherhood and law school graduation suit you." Dr. Amara Okafor, Lauren's obstetrician, joined the gathering with her husband and 2 daughters. During the pregnancy, she had become more than a doctor. She had been a fierce advocate who documented the medical effects of Lauren's emotional abuse, providing crucial evidence for the court case. "Lauren, I've delivered thousands of babies, but watching Sophia's birth after everything you went through, it reminded me why I became a doctor, to help strong women bring new life into the world safely." But perhaps the most meaningful guest was Miguel Santos, who arrived wearing his best suit and carrying a small wrapped package. The man who had risked his job to provide evidence against Bruce had become like family to Lauren, a reminder that courage could be found in the most unexpected places. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his weathered hands gentle as he held Sophia for the first time, "this little girl is going to grow up knowing that good people fought for her before she was even born. She'll never wonder if she's loved or protected." As the celebration continued around her, Lauren found herself stepping onto the terrace that overlooked Central Park. The city sprawled beneath her in all its complexity, millions of people living their own stories of triumph and tragedy, love and betrayal, justice and mercy. Somewhere in that urban tapestry, Bruce Mitchell was learning to live with the consequences of his choices, working a desk job in New Jersey and renting a room in a house owned by strangers who didn't know his history. Chloe Summers had been sentenced to 6 months in minimum security prison for credit card fraud and violation of the restraining order, but more importantly, she had discovered that internet infamy lasted far longer than internet fame. Every job application, every apartment rental, every first date began with the same Google search results that showed her cruelest moments preserved in digital amber. But Lauren had learned to find peace in the knowledge that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that actions had consequences, that truth mattered, and that vulnerable people deserved protection from those who would exploit their trust. "Mama?" Lauren turned to see Nalani standing in the doorway, holding Sophia with the practiced ease of someone who had become an honorary aunt. "She's getting fussy. I think someone's hungry." Back in the nursery, as Lauren settled into the rocking chair her grandmother had used to nurse her own children, she felt the profound satisfaction of a life rebuilt on its own terms. The woman Bruce had called an incubator had become a lawyer, a mother, an advocate for justice, and a testament to the truth that broken things could be mended into something stronger than they had been before. Sophia's tiny hand wrapped around Lauren's finger with surprising strength, and in that moment Lauren saw the future clearly. Her daughter would grow up in a home where love was expressed through kindness, not control, where strength was measured by how you lifted others up, not how you tore them down, where justice wasn't just an abstract concept, but a living principle that shaped how people treated each other. "You know what, little one?" Lauren whispered as Sophia nursed contentedly in her arms. "Your mama learned something important while she was waiting to meet you. She learned that the people who try to break you often end up revealing how unbreakable you really are." Outside, Manhattan pulsed with its endless energy, but inside the penthouse that Lauren had reclaimed through courage and law, a new story was beginning, one written by a woman who had discovered that the strongest victories were the ones that protected not just yourself, but everyone who came after you. As the sun set over Central Park, Lauren Mitchell, lawyer, mother, survivor, and warrior, rocked her daughter to sleep and smiled at the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges to face, new battles to fight, and new reasons to prove that justice, however delayed, never truly dies. The woman who had once been called an incubator had become the architect of her own destiny, and her daughter would inherit a world where that kind of transformation was not just possible, but celebrated. 2 years later, the Manhattan family court building on Lafayette Street buzzed with an energy that Judge Esperanza Vasquez had rarely witnessed in her 20-year career. The same courtroom where Lauren Mitchell had once fought for her basic dignity now hosted the official launch of the Mitchell Doctrine, a legal precedent that would forever change how New York courts handled cases of systematic financial and emotional abuse during pregnancy. Lauren stood at the podium, 2-year-old Sophia balanced on her hip, addressing a room filled with family law attorneys, domestic violence advocates, and survivors who had found their voices through her example. The woman who had once trembled in this very room now commanded it with the quiet authority of someone who had transformed personal pain into public purpose. "When I discovered my husband's betrayal in our bedroom while I was 7 months pregnant," Lauren began, her voice steady and clear, "I thought my story was ending. I thought I was powerless, disposable, forgotten. But I learned something that every person in this room needs to understand. Your story doesn't end when someone tries to write you out of it. Your story begins when you pick up the pen and start writing your own chapters." In the gallery, Miguel Santos sat with pride radiating from his weathered face, wearing the suit Lauren had bought him for the ceremony. Beside him, Nalani Rodriguez dabbed at her eyes while simultaneously live-streaming the event for the thousands of followers who had come to see Lauren's journey as proof that justice could still prevail in an unjust world. Richard Castellanos, now a partner at his own firm specializing in family law and domestic violence cases, nodded approvingly as Lauren outlined the legal protections the Mitchell Doctrine would provide for vulnerable spouses. The precedent established by her case had already protected 47 women across New York State, with similar legislation being introduced in California, Texas, and Florida. The Mitchell Doctrine establishes 3 fundamental principles, Lauren continued, bouncing Sophia gently as her daughter played with the pearls around her mother's neck. The same pearls Bruce had once given to Chloe, now reclaimed and transformed into a symbol of recovery rather than theft. First, systematic documentation of adultery on social media constitutes intentional infliction of emotional distress and can be prosecuted accordingly. Second, property purchased with separate funds before marriage remains separate property, and adultery conducted on such property strengthens the innocent spouse's claim to exclusive use. Third, intimidation of witnesses, regardless of economic status, will be treated as obstruction of justice with criminal penalties. In the back of the courtroom, a small group of law students from Columbia took careful notes, studying the case that would define their future practice. Among them sat Destiny Morales, Chloe's former roommate who had changed her major from marketing to family law, after witnessing firsthand how the legal system could either enable abuse or provide justice for survivors. As Lauren concluded her remarks, Judge Vasquez took the podium to share the impact the Mitchell case had made on the judicial system. In my career, I've seen too many cases where systematic cruelty was dismissed as marital problems or relationship drama, and the Mitchell case proved that when victims are given proper legal support, and when evidence is properly documented, justice can be both swift and complete. She gestured to a chart showing statistics that made the room fall silent. Domestic violence reports had increased 34% in Manhattan since the Mitchell case, but successful prosecutions had increased 78%. More women were reporting abuse because they now believed the system would protect them rather than dismiss them. Most importantly, Judge Vasquez continued, we've learned that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice perfected. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the courthouse lobby, Lauren found herself approached by a young woman whose story felt achingly familiar. She was 6 months pregnant, tears streaming down her face, holding a manila envelope that looked suspiciously like the one Miguel had given Lauren 2 years earlier. Mrs. Mitchell, the woman whispered. My name is Kaya Johansson. I think I need help. My husband, and there's evidence. I don't know what to do. Lauren handed Sophia to Nalani and knelt beside Kaya, taking her trembling hands in her own. You know exactly what to do, she said gently. You're here, aren't you? You brought evidence, didn't you? You're already doing it. She gave Kaya Richard Castellanos' card and her own personal number. Justice isn't just about what happens in courtrooms, Kaya. It's about what happens when one woman decides to protect the next woman, and then the next, until the cycle of cruelty finally breaks. As evening fell over Manhattan, Lauren walked through Central Park pushing Sophia's stroller, marveling at how different the world looked when viewed through the lens of victory rather than defeat. Somewhere in the city, Bruce Mitchell was finishing another long day at his clerical job in Newark, living in a studio apartment under a name that still brought whispers of scandal when Googled. His financial punishment was complete, but his social exile would likely last much longer. Chloe Summers had been released from prison months earlier, but her digital footprint ensured that her cruelest moments lived on in perpetuity. Her Instagram account remained suspended, her apartment applications were regularly rejected, and her dating profile matches inevitably discovered her history and blocked her contact. She had learned that the internet never forgot, and that justice in the digital age had a very long memory. But Lauren had also learned something unexpected about forgiveness, not the kind that excused cruelty or minimized harm, but the kind that freed survivors from carrying their oppressor's weight. She didn't forgive Bruce and Chloe for their benefit, but for her own peace and for Sophia's future. Her daughter would grow up knowing that her mother had chosen healing over hatred, justice over vengeance, and strength over bitterness. As they reached the playground where Sophia loved to swing while Lauren pushed her gently back and forth, Lauren felt the presence of her grandmother, the woman whose coat had been stolen, but whose legacy of dignity had been restored. The inheritance that had bought the penthouse had become the foundation for a new life, a legal career, and a movement that would protect countless women for generations to come. You know what, baby girl? Lauren said, as Sophia giggled with delight at the sensation of flying through the warm evening air. Your mama learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the reason you're able to help everyone else. Sometimes getting knocked down is just the first step to standing up stronger than you ever were before. The swing continued its gentle arc, carrying a little girl who would grow up in a world slightly more, just because her mother had refused to let cruelty have the final word. And in the growing dusk of a Manhattan evening, Lauren Mitchell, survivor, lawyer, mother, and architect of her own incredible comeback, smiled at the knowledge that the best chapters of her story were still being written. The woman who had been called an incubator had incubated something far more powerful than a child. She had incubated justice, courage, and hope, and those things, once born, would live forever. Would you have the courage to fight back when the person you trusted most tries to destroy you? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.